You know, there is a specific taste to wet lake sand when it's being ground into your cheekbone by a guy who probably failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times. It's gritty, it smells like dead algae, and it really tests your patience, especially when you have a knee digging into your spine that feels less like a restraint technique and more like a desperate attempt to look tough for an audience. Stay down. Do not move, the guy on my back screamed, his voice cracking just enough to betray the adrenaline shaking his hands, while his partner fumbled with a pair of plastic zip ties like he was trying to figure out a Chinese finger trap. I could hear the cameras clicking, the murmurs of the crowd gathering on the boardwalk of Cypress Landing. These people thought they were watching justice in action. They thought they were seeing their brave community security team take down a dangerous criminal. But what they didn't know, what these two discount store commandos definitely didn't know, was that inside the inner pocket of my denim jacket, pressed right up against my ribs, was a leather wallet containing a badge that carried the weight of the United States federal government. They had about 30 seconds to let me go before they crossed a line from annoying civil lawsuit to federal felony, and the clock was ticking. Let me back up a bit, just so you understand how a decorated U.S. Marshal ended up face down in the mud of a private gated community in Florida. 20 minutes before I was eating sand, I was just Mason Reed, a guy looking for a little peace and quiet. I'd just come off a 90-day deep cover operation in Jacksonville tracking a syndicate moving illegal firearms through the ports. And if you've never done deep cover, let me tell you, it eats at your soul. You forget who you are. You forget what silence sounds like. Cypress Landing was supposed to be the antidote, a high-end, master-planned community where the biggest scandal was usually someone leaving their trash cans out past 4 p.m. I'd driven my truck down to the public access fishing pier, which, legally speaking, is open to anyone with a fishing license, regardless of what the HOA says, just hoping to cast a line and watch the sun go down without looking over my shoulder. The water was glass, the air smelled like jasmine and money, and for about 10 minutes, I actually relaxed, but then I heard the crunch of boots on gravel, heavy, deliberate steps that weren't trying to be quiet. Freeze. Hands where I can see them. I turned around slowly to see two guys who looked like they were cosplaying as SWAT team members. They were wearing navy blue tactical pants that were 2 sizes too tight, vests with community protection velcroed onto the chest, and duty belts that were weighed down with enough gear to invade a small country. The lead guy, let's call him Kyle, had a buzz cut and eyes that were way too close together. His partner, Brody, looked like he was just happy to be included, holding a radio like it was a holy relic. You are under arrest for criminal trespassing on private association property, Kyle barked, puffing his chest out. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of HOA arbitration. I almost laughed, I really did, because that is not the Miranda warning. That is a word salad tossed by someone who watches too many cop shows but doesn't understand the law. Gentlemen, I said, keeping my hands visible but not raising them because I refused to surrender to rent-a-cops. This pier is designated public access under Florida Statute 373. Look it up. I'm not trespassing, and you don't have the authority to arrest anyone. Shut up, Brody yelled, stepping forward. We've been tracking you for days, pal. We know you've been casing the waterfront properties, looking for open boat houses. That was the first red flag. Well, the first red flag that wasn't their terrible uniforms, because I hadn't been here for days. I'd arrived 20 minutes ago, which meant they weren't just mistaken. They were lying. They were building a narrative. A crowd had started to form, residents in polo shirts and sundresses stopping their evening walks to watch the show. Most of them looked approving, nodding at each other like, finally, the security team is earning their keep. But there was one woman, standing near a bench in a blue dress, who wasn't nodding. She had her phone up, recording, but her eyebrows were pulled together, skeptical, zooming in on their badges, then on my face, like the math wasn't adding up for her. Kyle's radio crackled, and a voice cut through the humid air, a woman's voice, cool, crisp, and dripping with authority. Status report, Unit 1. Is the intruder secured? We got him, ma'am. Kyle said into his lapel mic, trying to look cool. Caught him red-handed at the launch. He had burglary tools disguised as fishing gear. Burglary tools, my rod and reel, right? Bring him to processing, the voice commanded. I want a full interrogation, standard protocol. Standard protocol? For a trespassing charge? That's when I knew this wasn't just overzealous security. This was an operation. These guys weren't just protecting property values. They were hunting. You guys are making a mistake that's going to cost you more than your jobs, I said calmly as Kyle moved in. Save it for the tribunal, Kyle sneered, and that's when he lunged, slamming me into the sand. Which brings us back to the present moment, with Brody tightening the zip tie until my circulation cut off and the crowd gasping in a mix of horror and excitement. They hauled me up, dusting off their knees like they'd just stormed a beach in Normandy, and shoved me toward a modified golf cart that had been painted matte black to look like a tactical vehicle. It even had a little cage welded onto the back. As they pushed me in, my jacket fell open just an inch, revealing the gold glint of my badge pinned to the inside pocket. But they were too busy high-fiving each other to notice. They slammed the cage door, and as we rolled away, I locked eyes with the woman in the blue dress. She was still filming, and for a second, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, or maybe just realization that this didn't look like a lawful arrest. It looked like a kidnapping. They drove me deep into the complex, past the mansions and the manicured hedges, to a building that was marked maintenance, but looked more like a bunker, blacked-out windows, keypad entry, way too many antennas on the roof for a place that supposedly just housed lawnmowers. "Welcome to the dark site," Kyle said with a grin as they dragged me out of the cart. "This is where we teach outsiders about respect." They marched me inside, and I have to admit, I was impressed, not by them, but by the money. The interior looked like a police precinct from a movie, banks of monitors showing feeds from hundreds of cameras across the property, expensive radio equipment, and a holding cell with a reinforced door. Kyle cut the zip ties, probably because he wanted to see me rub my wrists and look defeated, but the second my hands were free, he made a mistake. He got in my face, invading my space, poking my chest with a finger that felt like a sausage. "You listen to me, Drifter," he growled. "You're going to sign a confession saying you were casing houses, or we're going to make sure you fall down the stairs a few times before the sheriff gets here." He pulled his arm back, telegraphing a sucker punch that was so slow I could have made a sandwich before it arrived. I didn't even think. Muscle memory took over. I shifted my weight, pivoted, and caught his wrist in a compliance lock that bent his arm at an angle arms aren't supposed to bend. He screamed, dropping to his knees, his face going from red to white in a heartbeat. "Section 776, I said, my voice low and steady right in his ear. "Self-defense against imminent bodily harm. You throw a punch at a detainee, you better be ready to eat the floor." Brody froze, his hand hovering over his taser, his eyes wide. How? How did you do that?" "I've had training," I said, releasing Kyle and stepping back to a defensive posture. "Real training. Unlike the weekend seminar you two clearly failed." Kyle scrambled up, cradling his wrist, looking at me with a mix of hatred and fear. "You're dead," he hissed. "You assault a security officer. You're done." The intercom on the wall buzzed, and that icy female voice filled the room. "Enough playing. Bring him to the conference room. I want to see this drifter who fights like a soldier." They led me down a hallway to a set of double doors. Inside, it looked like a corporate boardroom, polished mahogany table, leather chairs, and at the head of the table, a massive screen that was currently dark. "Sit," Kyle ordered, standing by the door, keeping his distance now. I sat, and the screen flickered to life. No video, just a waveform responding to the voice. "Mason Reed," the voice said, and the air left the room. "United States Marshal, currently on administrative leave following the Jacksonville port bust, rumored to be under investigation by Internal Affairs for missing evidence." I sat very still, my mind racing. That information was classified. The investigation by Internal Affairs was a cover story we'd planted to flush out a leak in the department. It wasn't real, but the fact that this woman knew about it meant she had access to databases she definitely shouldn't. "You're well informed," I said, deciding to lean into the lie. If she thought I was a dirty cop on the run, she might show her hand. "I make it my business to know who comes into my community," she said. "I'm Evelyn Vance, president of the board, and you, Marshall Reed, are a problem, unless you're an opportunity." I leaned back, putting a casual look on my face. "I'm listening." "You're running," she said, her voice smooth. "You're hiding out because things got hot in Jacksonville. You need cash, and you need a place to lay low." "Maybe," I said, Or maybe I just like fishing. Don't insult my intelligence, Evelyn snapped. We searched your truck. We found the burner phones. We know you're off the grid. Here's the deal. Marshall, we have a system here. We catch people breaking the rules or breaking the law, and we offer them a choice. Pay a fine to the Community Improvement Fund, and we wipe the tapes, or we hand you over to the authorities with a very damaging file of evidence. Extortion, I said. You're shaking down people you catch trespassing. We prefer civil settlement, she corrected. And for a federal agent with a dirty record? The price is high, $50,000, cash, today, or I send the video of you assaulting my security officer straight to your superiors at the DOJ, along with your location. It clicked then, the whole scheme. They weren't just bullying tourists. They were hunting targets with something to lose. They probably caught doctors, lawyers, maybe other cops, people who would pay to make a problem go away. And now they thought they had a dirty marshal on the hook. I let a look of desperation creep into my eyes. I don't have 50 grand on me, I said. My cash is secure, hidden. I need to make a call, get someone to move it. Who? Kyle asked, stepping forward. My partner. I lied. He's holding the proceeds from the Jacksonville job. Evelyn paused. I could practically hear the greed gears turning. A dirty cop meant dirty money, and she wanted a piece. Fine, she said. You can make one call, on speaker, and if you try anything clever, we burn you. They handed me my phone. I dialed the number for the Tactical Operations Center in Miami, but I used a coded sequence that triggered a distress/duress alert. When the operator answered, he sounded like a confused cousin, just like the protocol dictated. Hey, I said. It's Mason. I'm in a jam at Cypress Landing. I need you to access the safety deposit box, the big one. Bring the package to the main dock here in 1 hour, 50,000, small bills. Understood, the operator said, his voice casual, but I knew that on his end, a massive digital map had just lit up red with my location, and a tactical team was already sprinting for the chopper. Done, I said, hanging up. He's coming. Excellent, Evelyn purred. We'll do the exchange at the Central Pier, public place, lots of witnesses, so you won't try anything violent. I want the community to see our security team keeping the neighborhood safe. She wanted a show. She wanted to parade me in front of the residents as a conquered threat to boost her approval ratings. Hubris. It's always the hubris that gets them. They loaded me back into the cart and drove me to the main pier. By now, word had spread. There were nearly 100 people gathered, phones out, whispering. Evelyn was there in person this time, standing on a raised platform like she was giving a sermon. She was older than she sounded, silver hair, sharp suit, eyes like flint. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced into a megaphone as they dragged me out. Today we have protected you from a grave threat. This man is a corrupt federal agent, a criminal hiding in our midst, but thanks to the vigilance of your HOA, he has been apprehended. The crowd murmured, some cheered, but I saw the woman in the blue dress again. Sarah, she was right up front, and she looked disgusted. She was still filming. Kyle and Brody forced me to my knees in the center of the pier, face down. Kyle hissed, "Don't look at the residents." He pushed my head forward, trying to humiliate me, trying to make me look small, but as I bent forward, I shifted my shoulders, a subtle movement, just enough to loosen the button on my jacket. "Wait," Evelyn shouted, playing to the crowd. "I want him to admit it. I want you all to hear him confess to threatening this community." She walked over, holding the megaphone to my face. "Tell them, Marshall, tell them you were here to steal. Tell them you're a disgrace to your badge." I looked up at her, smiling. "I'll tell them something, Evelyn." I jerked my body upright, twisting away from Kyle's grip. The movement dislodged my wallet from my inner pocket, and it slid across the concrete, flipping open as it stopped. The gold badge gleamed in the afternoon sun, the eagle and the star catching the light like a beacon. The letters, U.S. Marshal, were visible to everyone in the front row, and to every camera lens pointed our way. "I'm here," I boomed, my voice trained to carry over gunfire and riot noise, "because I am conducting an active federal investigation into a racketeering enterprise operating under the guise of this homeowners association." The silence was absolute. It was like the air had been sucked out of the universe. "That's a lie," Evelyn shrieked, but her voice wavered. "Is it?" I stood up, Kyle and Brody backing away. unsure what to do with a man who suddenly looked like a predator instead of prey. Title 18, United States Code. You are detaining a federal officer. You are engaging in extortion, wire fraud, and impersonating law enforcement. I pointed at Kyle. You. Zip ties now on her. Kyle looked at Evelyn, then at me, then at the badge. He did the math. I was just following orders, Kyle stammered. Then cooperate, I said, or you go down for conspiracy. And then, the sound came. The distinct, rhythmic thwup 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 of rotors, low and fast. People looked up to see a black helicopter banking hard over the lake. The side door open, men in heavy gear sitting on the skids. At the same time, 3 black SUVs tore through the front gates of the community, sirens wailing, bypassing the security checkpoint like it was made of cardboard. That, I said to Evelyn, whose face had gone the color of old paper, is my partner with the cash. The tactical team hit the ground running, securing the perimeter in seconds. Residents scattered, realizing this wasn't a show anymore. This was a raid. Evelyn tried to run. She actually kicked off her heels and tried to sprint toward the clubhouse, but she didn't make it 10 feet before 2 agents had her on the ground, reading her rights for real this time. I walked over to Kyle and Brody, who were standing with their hands raised, trembling. You boys want a deal? I asked. Yes, sir, please, Brody whimpered. Then you tell the FBI everything, where the files are, where the money is, every single person she extorted. It's in the server room, Kyle blurted out, behind the false wall in the maintenance shed, all of it, terabytes of blackmail. The cleanup took hours. They hauled boxes of evidence out of that bunker, hard drives, cash, files on judges, politicians, and cops that Evelyn had been bleeding dry for years. She had turned this neighborhood into her own personal piggy bank, using fear and fake authority to rule like a dictator. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, I walked back to the pier. The crowd was gone, except for one person, Sarah, the woman in the blue dress. She walked up to me, holding her phone. I got it all, she said. The threats, the badge drop, the look on her face when the chopper showed up. Good, I said. Hold on to that. The U.S. attorney might need it. You know, she said, leaning against the railing. We all hated her. We knew something was wrong, but we were too scared to say anything. She made us feel like we were crazy for questioning the rules. That's how tyrants work, I said, looking out at the calm water. They wrap themselves in rules until you can't move without breaking one. Then they make you pay for the privilege of existing. Well, she smiled, I think you broke the rules pretty good today. Sometimes, I said, tipping an imaginary hat. You have to break the rules to fix the game. 3 months later, I was back at the lake, fishing pole in hand. Evelyn Vance was awaiting trial on federal racketeering charges, looking at 20 years minimum. Kyle and Brody took plea deals and were currently serving time in a minimum security facility, probably learning how to be actual security guards. The HOA had been dissolved and reformed with a board that actually cared about trash collection and pool maintenance instead of extortion. The new president was Sarah, the woman in the blue dress. I cast my line into the water, the reel singing that high, thin note. An older man, a retired cop named Bill Henderson, walked up and set his tackle box down next to mine. Mind if I join you, Marshal? He asked. Free country, Bill, I said. We stood there in silence for a while, just watching the bobbers dance on the ripples. You know, Bill said, I spent 30 years on the force, and I never saw a takedown like that. You really let them arrest you? Best way to see the inside of the cage is to walk into it, I said. Risky, he grunted. Calculated, I corrected. You think it's over? He asked. Corruption like that, it leaves roots. Maybe, I said. But roots die when you expose them to the light, and we shined a hell of a light on this place. That you did, Bill chuckled, that you did. We fished until the stars came out, enjoying the quiet, the real quiet, not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. And as I packed up my gear, feeling the weight of the badge in my pocket, I thought about authority. Real authority doesn't need to scream, it doesn't need to threaten, and it definitely doesn't need a fake uniform. Real authority is just the willingness to stand between a bully and their victim and say no more. So, tell me, have you ever dealt with someone who thought a plastic badge made them a king? Or an HOA that acted more like a crime syndicate? Let me know in the comments. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that these little tyrants are everywhere, and sometimes, all it takes is one person to refuse to kneel to bring the whole house of cards down. Stay safe out there. Keep your eyes open, and never, ever let them put the zip ties on you without a fight. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.